They say hard work always pays off, but I am here to tell you sometimes it just gets you used. My name is Olivia Barnes. I am 36 years old, born and raised just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I was a senior systems engineer at a mid-sized tech company called TechCore Systems, and for 5 long years, I gave that place everything I had. I came in early. I stayed late. I picked up the slack when other people missed deadlines or pushed out sloppy code. I did not ask for credit. I just wanted to be part of something that mattered, something that ran smoothly and made an impact. But looking back, I was not part of a team. I was a patch kit on a sinking ship. At TechCore, if something went wrong, it was always someone else's fault, usually mine. I became the unofficial cleaner. Junior devs would leave half-built systems on staging servers, project managers would rush deadlines without specs, and somehow, I was always the one staying until midnight to fix it. No one asked. They just assumed I would do it. And I did. Every time. Not because I was a pushover, but because I actually cared. I thought if I proved myself enough times, someone would finally say, "Hey, Olivia's the backbone of this operation." But that day never came. Not once. Then there was Bradley Kemp, the chief technology officer, the king of passive-aggressive praise. He had this uncanny ability to make you feel stupid and small while smiling like he was doing you a favor. The guy wore $700 shoes and talked like he was coaching a TED Talk every time he opened his mouth. He did not code, he did not manage, he just critiqued, and always from the sidelines. He once told me during a review, "You do solid cleanup work, Olivia, but leaders do not fix, they build." That stung. I was building, just not for him. What Brad did not know, what none of them knew, was that I was building something of my own after hours. It started as a weekend hobby. I was tinkering with remote diagnostic chips in my garage, trying to solve a problem I saw in our industry. Predictive maintenance sensors were clunky, expensive, and outdated. I was convinced there was a better way, so I prototyped one. At night, on my dime, in a space barely big enough to stretch my legs. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a reminder to myself that I was more than just a safety net for people who did not care if I broke. I never planned to make money off it. Not at first. It was therapy. It gave me control in a world where I had none. But when I got that first email, an industrial parts distributor asking for a sample after seeing a trade post, I realized this little garage experiment might actually go somewhere. I was scared, excited, proud. It was mine, not TechCore's, not Brad's, just mine. And for once I felt like I was building something that truly mattered. I kept it quiet. I stayed compliant. My contract allowed side projects as long as I did not use company resources or work on it during business hours, which I never did. But the second Brad caught wind of it, you would have thought I had committed corporate treason. He found out through a clerical error, a misrouted invoice for one of my prototypes landed on a shared company server, an honest mistake, one that cost me everything. But before we get to that, you need to understand what kind of battlefield I was working on. TechCore was not a company. It was a kingdom built on ego and fear. People got promoted for playing politics, not performance. The ones who actually got work done? People like me. We stayed in the background, invisible, replaceable. I watched louder, less competent people move up while I worked weekends to keep our systems from collapsing. And the worst part, I let it happen because I thought loyalty would pay off in the end. It did not. So yes, I was the ghost fixer, the silent one, the one who held the seams together while everyone else took the credit. I do not say that with pride anymore. I say it with regret. But here's the thing about ghosts. Just because you cannot see them does not mean they are not watching. And when you treat them like they are disposable, you might not notice until it is too late. And for Brad Kemp, it would be far too late. Every night after work, I would head straight home, change out of my business casual, and disappear into my garage. That little space became my sanctuary. I had my workbench, some old parts I salvaged from job sites, a soldering kit, and an old desktop I refurbished for testing firmware. To most people, it looked like clutter. To me, it was the closest thing I had to freedom. I had been tinkering with the same concept for over a year, a compact remote diagnostic chip that could be embedded into existing industrial sensors. I wanted it to track wear and tear in real time, log data automatically, and alert operators before things broke. The idea was to help companies save time, avoid downtime, and stop wasting money on routine maintenance that might not even be needed. It was simple, efficient, and if I pulled it off, a real game changer. I did not start it to get rich. I just saw a problem and wanted to solve it. That is what real engineers do. We build to fix, not just to show off. And after spending so many years cleaning up behind sloppy code and broken processes at TechCore, I knew exactly where the gaps were. I had seen it all firsthand. Their hardware suppliers were decades behind. Their sensors only triggered when equipment had already failed. Nobody was thinking ahead, just reacting. So I figured, why not me? Why not try to build something that could prevent the chaos instead of patching it up afterward? One day, I was working late, again, trying to finalize a client presentation that someone else had completely butchered. Brad walked by my desk and noticed a few sketches in my notebook. I had been doodling designs for my chip layout in the margins while I waited for a system build to compile. He stopped, squinted, and said, "What is that? Another one of your side hobbies?" I laughed nervously and shrugged. "Just something I have been working on at home, a diagnostics chip." He gave me this smirk I will never forget, not amused, not impressed, just smug. Nobody is buying garage science projects, Olivia. If you want to play inventor, do it on your own time. And then he walked away without even waiting for a response. That moment burned itself into my memory. I knew he saw me as small, as someone who was good enough to fix the messes but not good enough to lead or create. But I also knew he was wrong. I had already been in contact with a few vendors online, small firms, sensor manufacturers, even some industrial repair networks. Most were polite, some ignored me. But one conversation changed everything. A regional rep from an agriculture tech firm based in Kansas saw one of my prototype videos. I had posted a short clip showing how my chip could detect pressure anomalies in water pumps used for irrigation. He messaged me directly, said he was impressed, asked if I had plans to license or manufacture. At first, I thought it was a joke. I stared at the message for a full minute before I replied. We set up a call, and 2 weeks later, he sent me a letter of intent. They wanted to integrate my chip into a pilot program across 3 major farms. It was not a contract yet, but it was serious. It meant they believed in my idea. My garage project was about to hit real-world production. I remember sitting in my car outside TechCore that day, holding the letter in my hands, heart pounding. I wanted to scream it from the rooftops, but I kept it quiet. Brad would never believe it. The others would not understand. It was mine, and I wanted to protect it. Something changed in me after that. Every time I walked into TechCore, I felt different. Not because anything around me had improved, but because I had something they did not. I had a future beyond those walls. I had proof that I could build something on my own. Brad could sneer and roll his eyes all he wanted. The industry had just validated the very thing he laughed at. And deep down, I started to hope that maybe, just maybe, I would not have to keep fixing other people's problems forever. Maybe one day, I would leave that place behind and never look back. It was supposed to be just another Monday. I was halfway through a code audit when I noticed a strange calendar invite pop up on my screen. Emergency Executive Briefing, Conference Room 4B. No subject line, no sender name. Just 15 minutes notice. My stomach turned immediately. Something felt off. I had not missed a deadline. Nothing I was working on was delayed. Still, I grabbed my laptop, took a deep breath, and headed down the hall. The walk to that room felt like miles. I had no idea I was walking straight into a setup. When I opened the door, the entire executive team was already there. Brad was sitting at the head of the table, arms crossed, face tight. I barely had a chance to sit down before he slid a printed document across the table toward me. I glanced down and instantly recognized it. My heart dropped. It was one of the invoices I had sent out under Aeris Dynamics, the LLC I had created for my side work. Somehow, one of them had ended up in TechCore's internal accounting system. A simple email misroute, a mistake, nothing more. But Brad did not see it that way. "Care to explain this?" he asked, tapping the paper. "Looks like someone's been moonlighting on our time." His voice was low but sharp, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I cleared my throat and tried to stay calm. That invoice was for a separate client, unrelated to TechCore. My contract clearly allows me to pursue external work, as long as it does not interfere with company projects, which it has not. I made sure to keep my voice even. I knew my rights. I had checked that clause a dozen times before I even ordered my first chip. Brad's lips curled into a condescending smile. "You think building science fair gadgets in your garage counts as external work?" he scoffed. "This invoice went through our systems. That makes it our business." I tried to explain that it was an honest mistake. The invoice must have been attached to the wrong thread or auto-forwarded by my personal device when I was replying to a vendor. I never used company resources for Aeris, never once touched TechCore's servers or tools, but it did not matter. The moment Brad saw something he could twist into a liability, he jumped on it like a wolf with fresh meat. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "You are done here, Olivia. We will have HR process your exit. Your badge, your devices, turn them in now." Just like that. No warning, no formal hearing, no investigation. And worst of all, the rest of the executives just sat there in silence. No one spoke up. Not the CFO I had helped during a systems crash at midnight. Not the VP of operations whose team I had supported during their last failed rollout. I was invisible again. Useful until I was not. Then disposable. They walked me out within the hour. I was not even allowed to return to my desk alone. An intern escorted me like I was some kind of criminal. My badge was deactivated before I reached the elevator. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I passed. Some were confused. Others looked away. No one said a word. I did not cry, not yet. I just kept walking, holding my bag close like it was the last piece of myself I still had control over. Once I got to my car, I sat there for nearly 20 minutes staring out the windshield, my hands shaking. Getting fired like that is not just about losing a job. It is losing the rhythm of your life, the place you go every day, the people you talk to, the work that gave your day structure. But what cut the deepest was not the paycheck or the title. It was the humiliation, being accused of stealing time, being treated like I had betrayed them, when in reality, I was the only one who ever went above and beyond. Brad made sure to strip every ounce of dignity from the process. That was the point. But what Brad did not know was that Aeris Dynamics was no longer just a hobby. That invoice he found? It was part of a deal worth more than any quarterly bonus TechCore had ever offered me. His attempt to end my career was going to backfire in a way he could not even imagine. At the time, though, all I could feel was the sting of being ambushed, discarded, and erased. But pain like that, it does not go away, it transforms. And in my case, it turned into something a lot more powerful. The first 3 days after I got fired were a blur. I barely left the couch. I kept replaying the moment Brad slid that invoice across the table. His smug face, his fake outrage, the silence of the others. It was like a movie I could not shut off. My stomach was constantly knotted, my head pounding from lack of sleep. I had some savings, but not enough to float me for long, not in San Diego. Rent alone could eat up half my bank account. Then there was health insurance, gone overnight. And my dad, his medication bills were hundreds a month ever since his stroke last year. I was now fully responsible, with no income and no safety net. I applied for unemployment right away, even though it felt humiliating. I kept refreshing my inbox, hoping for a response from the agriculture distributor who had sent me that letter of intent. At least that gave me a shred of hope. But I was scared, deeply scared. I had worked for TechCore for 9 years. My whole professional identity had been wrapped up in being the dependable fixer, the behind-the-scenes cleaner. Without that job, I felt stripped of purpose. I kept thinking, what if Brad was right? What if no one takes me seriously outside that building? What if this is it for me? Then one night, I was sitting on the floor of my garage, surrounded by cables and empty takeout containers, when I remembered something my mom used to say. It was not a warm bedtime quote or some Pinterest mantra. It was gritty, direct. She told me once, after I got rejected from an internship in college, "Build so well they regret letting you go." At the time, I shrugged it off, but now it hit me like a lightning bolt. That sentence did not just inspire me, it challenged me. It dared me to fight back, not with anger, but with results. I stood up, turned off my phone, and got to work. The garage I once used for quiet tinkering turned into a war room overnight. I reorganized everything, cleared off the cluttered shelves, relabeled components, rewired my test bench, and installed 2 extra monitors I had been storing for someday. Someday had arrived. I filed formal incorporation papers for Aeris Dynamics. No more playing small. I was not just someone with a side hustle. I was building a company, a product, a solution the industry had not even realized it needed yet. The first thing I did was finalize the prototype. It was about 80% complete when I was still at TechCore, but I had held off on pushing it forward. Now, with no distractions, no team meetings, and no Brad breathing down my neck, I focused like never before. I fixed the firmware bug that had been throwing false pressure readings. I optimized the chip's power draw so it could run 6 months longer without battery replacement. I even built a better demo rig using parts I had been collecting over the years. Water pumps, heating sensors, soil monitors, real-life agricultural gear, not just lab equipment. At night, I researched. I studied supply chain trends, vendor networks, integration software, everything. I dug into white papers, reached out to engineers on LinkedIn, joined 2 industry forums. I was not just building a product, I was positioning it. I wanted Aeris Dynamics to be the bridge between outdated infrastructure and predictive technology. And every time I felt tired or overwhelmed, I pictured Brad's face when he fired me. The way he smiled like he had won. That image fueled me more than coffee ever could. Within 2 weeks, I had a working demo ready to ship. I emailed the distributor again, attaching new documentation and a short video walkthrough. This time, the reply came within hours. They loved it. They wanted to schedule a call to talk about a pilot rollout across 7 farms, not 3. 7. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was steering the wheel instead of just fixing the engine. I printed out my mother's words and taped them above my monitor. "Build so well they regret letting you go." That was not just my motto. It was my mission. And I was just getting started. Momentum is a strange thing. When you finally catch it, it moves faster than you expect, and you just have to hold on and keep steering. That is what it felt like once Aeris Dynamics started getting real traction. It all started with Carla Freeman. Carla was an old college friend who now ran Freeman Freight and Supply, a mid-sized logistics company out of Denver. We had not talked in a while, but when I told her what I was building and that I needed a production partner I could trust, she did not hesitate. "Send me the spec sheet," she said. "Let me see how fast I can make this real for you." 3 days later, we had a plan. And just like that, I had a pipeline forming. Carla pulled every string she could. She got my prototypes into a limited run at one of her partner plants. Nothing fancy, no huge production line or fancy packaging, just clean, functional industrial-grade chips with my name on them. It felt surreal, opening the first box. I held one of the devices in my hand and stared at it like it was gold, not because of the money it might bring, but because it was mine, built from scratch. No one could take that away now. While Carla handled freight and warehousing, I used every contact I had left in the industry. I reached out to old coworkers, vendor reps, even engineers I met at tech expos 5 years ago. If I had shaken your hand at some point in my career, I was now sending you a message. I pitched over Zoom from my kitchen table, sometimes at midnight, sometimes during breakfast. I showed off the chip's remote diagnostics, its low-power design, its compatibility with legacy systems. People were interested, curious. A few gave me polite, "We will circle back" answers, but others saw the same potential I did. The first client who signed a purchase order was a small agricultural automation firm in Nebraska. Ironically, they also happened to be a second-tier supplier to TechCore. They were integrating new sensor tech into their smart irrigation controls, and my chip fit perfectly. They had no idea the product they were installing had been designed by the woman their upstream client had fired 3 weeks earlier. That first order was small, only 30 units, but it was a start. I handled every detail myself. I quality checked the shipment, packed it up, labeled it by hand, and drove it to the courier myself. I even tracked the delivery on my phone like it was a personal mission. When the package finally showed as delivered, I sat on the floor of my garage and cried. Not because it was a massive victory, but because it was the first real proof that I could do this. That Aeris Dynamics was not just a fantasy I clung to after losing everything. It was alive, and it had legs. From there, things started picking up. The Nebraska firm recommended me to 2 others. One of them had a regional supply contract with a commercial greenhouse network. That deal alone doubled my revenue projections. I reinvested everything. I upgraded my testing equipment, brought on a part-time contractor to help with code optimization, and negotiated with Carla to reserve more freight space. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, but it did not feel like burnout. It felt like purpose, like all the years of being overlooked were finally being rewritten, one sale at a time. What made me laugh, though, was when I checked the shipping records from one of my distributors. I saw a familiar address pop up. TechCore's regional fulfillment hub. One of their partners had ordered a diagnostic chip, my diagnostic chip, and had it drop shipped straight to TechCore. I stared at the record for a solid minute, stunned. They had no clue. The very same company that accused me of moonlighting was now testing my hardware. It felt poetic in a quiet, powerful way. I did not need to send a message. The invoice would speak for itself. Aeris Dynamics was not just surviving, it was moving. My brand was slowly working its way into conversations I was never invited to before. That little garage startup was no longer a side project. It was a contender, and I was just getting started. As Aeris Dynamics started gaining traction, I became obsessed with understanding exactly how far my reach extended. I was not just focused on building sales, I wanted insight. Every shipment, every client contract, every distributor agreement, I tracked it like a web forming in real time. What began as a simple spreadsheet turned into a full-blown vendor map. I color-coded every node, flagged every component, and soon enough, something very interesting started to appear. A pattern, one that made me lean back in my chair and stare at the screen in disbelief. TechCore, my former employer, was still using the exact same critical sensor components I had once worked on. Same specs, same manufacturers, same dependencies. And here is the wild part. Those components were now being routed through vendors who were sourcing from me. I had not planned it that way. I had not targeted them directly. But the industry is small, and once you start becoming known for reliability, your tech moves. Quietly, efficiently, and in my case, right into their pipeline. Without even realizing it, I was becoming a gatekeeper for the very hardware they once accused me of stealing time to build. At first, I just watched it unfold. It was not malicious. It was not even personal. It was business. But I would be lying if I said it did not feel satisfying. Knowing that my chip, my garage project, as Brad had once called it, was being relied on by their procurement team gave me a thrill I could not explain. They did not know it was mine. I never marketed Aeris under my name. I let the product speak for itself. But every time I saw a purchase order come in from one of their vendors, I smiled. It was like playing a game of chess where your opponent had no idea you were sitting across the board. I also started noticing how much influence I was gaining over timing and availability. These were not just boutique clients anymore. They were mid-tier suppliers, regional integrators, and logistics coordinators who serviced major tech firms. And they all wanted my chips, not just for their performance, but because they worked. They were easy to install, durable in field conditions, and built to spec every single time. In an industry where delays cost thousands per hour, that kind of consistency becomes priceless. I was no longer just filling a need. I was setting a standard. It was during one of my late-night tracking sessions that I realized just how much power I now held. A client emailed saying their shipment to a larger customer had been flagged for delay due to a packaging issue. I checked the address, San Mateo, TechCore's distribution center. My chip was in that crate, and the delay, entirely within my control. That was when it hit me. I was not just a vendor. I was a potential bottleneck, one they did not see coming because they had written me off. I called Carla the next morning. I want to start prioritizing fulfillment based on client tier, I said. She paused for a second. You mean like slowing down for certain buyers? I did not respond right away. I did not need to explain it. She got the message. We kept things above board, always professional, but let us just say that non-priority clients started seeing more routing reviews and packaging confirmations. Nothing unethical, just thorough, just cautious, just enough to create minor delays that looked like logistics noise on the outside, but were very intentional behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I kept expanding. I brought on a procurement analyst to help me track component dependencies across the supply chain. I was especially interested in who was supplying whom and how often those suppliers were connected to TechCore's ecosystem. The more I mapped it, the clearer it became. I was not just building a company. I was embedding myself into the network so deeply that they would not be able to pivot away without massive disruptions. I was not sabotaging them. I was simply becoming essential, one quiet contract at a time. People always say revenge is best served cold. I never saw it that way. I was not out to destroy Brad or TechCore. That was never the mission. But if they were going to depend on the same components they once dismissed, and if those components just happened to be mine, well, that felt like justice to me. Not dramatic, not loud, just smart, strategic, and slowly, very slowly, completely unavoidable. The message came in just after midnight. I was sorting invoices on my laptop, half asleep, when I saw Nate's name flash on the screen. I almost ignored it, thinking it was just another late-night spam message. But then I remembered. Nate Larson, 26, the junior engineer I had mentored for nearly a year at TechCore. Quiet, observant, loyal to a fault. He had always looked up to me in a big sister kind of way. Back when I was still working there, I had taken him under my wing, showing him how to fix code with logic, not luck, and how to stay one step ahead of the chaos Brad liked to create. When I got fired, Nate had looked crushed, like he had lost his only ally in the building. Hey, Olivia, his message started. This is off the record. Just thought you should know they're consolidating. No other context, just that sentence and a zipped folder titled Q3 Vendor Directive. I stared at the file for a second before clicking it open. Inside were slides from a confidential TechCore planning session. I recognized the format. Same corporate font, same dry jargon. But the content made my eyebrows lift. Brad was initiating a full-scale vendor consolidation initiative. The goal? Streamline and centralize all sensor component suppliers by Q3. Translation: cut out middlemen/vendor overlap and push for exclusive partnerships. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. This was it. They were walking right into my hands. Without realizing it, TechCore had set the stage for my final move. They were going to reduce all external vendors to just 1 or 2 core suppliers. And the best part, half the suppliers they were currently using were already sourcing from Aeris Dynamics. It was like watching someone step into a trap they had unknowingly built for themselves. All I had to do now was tighten the net. I messaged Nate back. "Thank you. This means a lot. Stay safe in there." He replied with a thumbs up and then wrote, "I hate how they treated you. This is the least I can do." That was it. No drama, no details, just a quiet gesture from someone who still had a conscience. I never asked him for more. I did not need him to leak anything further. What he had sent me was enough. A clear view of TechCore's playbook and a timeline to match. With that knowledge, I adjusted my own strategy. I flagged every Aeris-sourced component tied to TechCore's ecosystem and prioritized them, not just for production, but for branding. I redesigned the packaging, included updated technical sheets, and even offered limited-time efficiency bundles to vendors I knew were on TechCore's shortlist. It was not just about selling a product anymore. It was about becoming the obvious choice when their procurement team started asking, who can deliver everything we need on time and without the drama? Meanwhile, I began whispering to a few trusted clients, vendors who had long-term ties with TechCore. I never spoke ill of the company, but I did make sure they knew who was behind the chip that was suddenly making their installs smoother and diagnostics faster. Just want to make sure you have the latest firmware, I would say. We are updating everything now that Aeris is scaling up. Subtle but clear. Let the quality speak and let the name attach itself naturally. Every call, every shipment, every demo now had an added layer of strategy. I was not just growing a business. I was positioning Aeris to be irreplaceable. And thanks to Nate's quiet warning, I now had a clock ticking in the background. I knew when TechCore would start locking in their shortlist. I knew what kind of performance metrics they would look for, and I knew exactly how to stay just ahead of their curve. The beauty of it all was that Brad still had no clue. In his mind, I was probably off somewhere sulking or maybe freelancing at best. He had no idea that the garage engineer he had humiliated was now quietly becoming one of the most critical names in his supply chain. Not through revenge, not through sabotage. Just by being better, by building something that worked, that scaled, and that people actually wanted. Nate's tip had opened a door, but the work I had done is what carried me through it. Whisper networks are powerful, not because they are loud, but because they speak truth in places where no one is supposed to hear it. And now, with every order I processed and every connection I strengthened, I was making sure that truth became impossible to ignore. The morning the final contract came through, I just sat there for a second, staring at the PDF on my screen. 5 signatures, 5 new long-term supply agreements with manufacturers spread across logistics, agriculture, and aerospace. That last one surprised me. Those folks usually moved slower than glaciers. But not this time. They all wanted one thing, access to Aeris Dynamics diagnostic chip, and they wanted it fast. The same chip Brad once dismissed as a garage hobby. The same design I sketched on a napkin 2 years ago while waiting for my car's oil change. Now it was in the hands of major distributors, quietly working its way into global operations. And TechCore had just walked right into that web without even realizing it. They had been routing their sensors through second and third tier suppliers, companies that now had Aeris as a required vendor in their updated contracts. I knew it would only be a matter of time before someone in their procurement department noticed. And when they did, it was already too late. The ink was dry. The terms were set. I was their only path to keep their operations running without overhauling their entire architecture. They had unknowingly listed Aeris Dynamics as their primary component supplier for 3 mission-critical builds. No one at TechCore had connected the dots yet. Brad definitely had not. Then came the panic call. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished testing a new firmware build with my team and was looking forward to an actual sit-down lunch. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see an unknown number from San Jose. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. I answered. "Olivia, this is Brad. We need to talk." His voice was clipped, like he'd been grinding his teeth all morning. I stayed silent for a second longer than necessary, letting him squirm. "You are the contact listed on a critical component delivery we are waiting on. Aeris Dynamics," he said. "We are facing delays. I want to know when we can expect priority shipping." That was the moment I had imagined since the day I was walked out of TechCore's building like a criminal. But when it actually came, I felt nothing close to gloating. I felt steady, calm, almost clinical. I had worked hard to build something real, and here was the man who mocked it, now trying to strong-arm me like nothing had happened. "Brad," I said evenly, "I work in good faith. You fired me in bad faith. We are not the same." There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling papers. "This is not personal. This is about business continuity. I need assurances," he said, trying to slide back into his old executive tone. But I had heard it all before. The gaslighting, the power plays, the sudden switch from arrogant to desperate when things went sideways. It did not move me anymore. I had contracts, commitments, deadlines with companies that had believed in me without humiliation. Aeris has obligations, Brad. You are not on the priority list because you chose to cut ties with the engineer who built the product you now depend on. That was your choice. I honor mine. He tried again, this time softer. "Olivia, come on, this could hurt people. We are already behind on deployment." I took a breath. For a moment, I pictured the exhausted Olivia from months ago, crying into a pillow after that humiliating public firing. The Olivia who had to sell her bike to cover rent. She had been forced to swallow every ounce of pain in silence. But this Olivia, she had nothing left to prove. "I wish the team well," I said, "but I cannot break service terms for a company that showed me none. You made your decision. I have made mine." Click. I did not wait for his reply. I just hung up, closed my laptop, and went outside. The sky was clear, my hands were shaking, not from fear but from release. I had finally drawn the line and kept it. Brad had tried to muscle his way back into control, but this time, I had the leverage, I had the product, and most importantly, I had the choice. In business, everyone loves to talk about power. But the real power? It is not yelling in a boardroom or throwing titles around. It is being so good they have to come back to you, hat in hand, only to realize you no longer owe them anything. That was the day I realized Aeris was not just a startup. It was proof. Proof that quiet work, real work, outlasts every executive tantrum in the world. A few days after our last conversation, Brad called again, same number. I did not want to answer, but something told me I should. I had a feeling this time would be different. So I hit record on my phone, slid in my earbuds, and answered with the calmest voice I could manage. "Hello." There was silence for a beat, then the sound of someone exhaling like they had been holding their breath since Tuesday. "Olivia, listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot," he said, trying his best to sound reasonable. "We're under tremendous pressure here. I need you to understand how serious this is." I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on my laptop screen where a new contract from another client had just landed in my inbox. "I understand completely," I said. "You need a product that only Aeris Dynamics provides, and you need it now. Is that about right?" He hesitated, then the switch flipped. The fake politeness cracked. "You know what? This is not going to end well for you. I do not think you realize who you are dealing with. You are burning bridges in this industry, Olivia. People talk. Doors close. There it was, the threat, the desperate reach for control. But this time, I had leverage. Brad, I said clearly, every word sharp as a tack. The chip you called trash. It is currently the only reason your company is still breathing. I would suggest a little gratitude before you start making threats you cannot back up. His voice shot up an octave. You think I will let this go? I will make sure no major supplier works with you. I will make sure... I did not let him finish. You already made sure, I said. You made sure I would never come back. You made sure I would never forget how you treated me when I needed a chance. You made sure I would succeed without you. I hung up. No shouting, no drama, just finality. And the recording? I had everything. His threats, his insults, his complete lack of self-awareness, all in crystal clear audio. At first, I just saved the file. I was not planning to do anything with it. But then I got a call from Nate, the junior engineer I used to mentor. He had heard whispers. Word was spreading inside TechCore. Shipments delayed, clients angry, managers scrambling. People were finally starting to question how things had fallen apart so quickly. I told him about the call. I sent him the recording. He asked if he could share it, internally. I told him, do what you need to. Less than 24 hours later, the audio was everywhere. It leaked from the inside and spread like wildfire. It hit social media first, then landed on a few tech forums, and from there, the storm began. Engineers posted their own stories. Clients started asking public questions. A former HR rep anonymously confirmed the way I'd been fired. By the end of the week, Brad had gone dark. No public statements, no denials, just silence. But inside the company, I heard it was chaos. A full internal review was launched. Shareholders were furious. Department heads started forwarding complaints. Even some of Brad's closest allies turned on him. I did not expect that much fallout. I was just trying to protect myself. But once the truth got out, it had a life of its own. People were tired of bullies in leadership, tired of talent being thrown away because of ego. And my story? It struck a nerve. I got messages from strangers, engineers, designers, women in tech, people I had never met before thanking me for standing up. Some said they had saved the audio as a reminder. Some said it gave them the push they needed to quit toxic jobs. One person said, "You gave a voice to what we all go through but never say out loud." I did not know what to say to that. I just said thank you. Brad had tried to bury me. He had tried to silence me, then scare me. But in the end, it was his own voice, his own arrogance that burned it all down. The bridge he thought he was torching behind me? It turned out to be under his own feet. And I did not even have to light the match. He did that all by himself. Brad was let go within a month. The official email from TechCore's board used polished, hollow phrases: leadership restructuring, a new vision, future-facing initiatives. But everyone in the industry knew what it really meant. His meltdown, his threats, and that infamous recording had cost the company too much goodwill, too many contracts, and way too much trust. Clients started pulling out, engineers left quietly, and shareholders demanded answers. When none came, Brad was the first to go. I did not celebrate, not out loud anyway. The truth is, by the time they pushed him out, I had already moved on. Aeris Dynamics was on track to break 7 figures in contracted revenue for the year. Carla and I had just landed a deal with a major agricultural equipment manufacturer. My garage workshop had expanded into a full warehouse facility, and I had a small team now, 7 full-time staff, 2 interns, and a dog named Cooper who liked to nap under the 3D printer table. I never set out to build a company out of spite, but I was not ashamed that spite gave me the push when I needed it. Still, even with the growth, I never left my garage entirely. I kept my tools, my bench, and my soldering station exactly where they had always been. There is something grounding about going back to where it all started. Some evenings, after everyone has clocked out and the emails stop dinging, I go back there and tinker. Not for money, not for market, just to feel the hum of creation again. The same hum that made me fall in love with building when I was a kid messing with old radios in my dad's shed. Sometimes I think about how it all could have gone differently. If Brad had just pulled me aside quietly, if he had actually read my contract before throwing accusations, if he had recognized that what I was doing outside of TechCore did not compete, it complemented. But that was never how he worked. He did not see value in people, only in control. And when he lost that, everything else collapsed. There was one final twist I did not expect. A few weeks after the news broke about his exit, I got a message through LinkedIn. It was from Miriam, TechCore's new interim CTO. She used to be in another division and we had barely interacted before. Her message was short. Would you consider consulting on our sensor line realignment? No contracts attached yet, just a conversation. I stared at that message for a while. Then I replied politely. I appreciate the outreach, Miriam, but I built Aeris so I would never have to say yes to something that made me feel small. Wishing you and your team the best. I did not need to take the call. I did not need the contract. What I needed, I had already given myself. Freedom, respect, and something no one at TechCore ever gave me. Belief. I believed in my own ideas. I backed them when no one else would. And now, those ideas were helping entire companies run smoother, safer, and smarter. Not bad for a hobby, right? My mother passed away the year before I got fired. She never got to see what Aeris became, but I kept a sticky note she once left me on the fridge. It said, "When people tell you your dreams are small, it is usually because their courage is." I carry that with me, every deal, every meeting, every long night. And to this day, when someone asks how Aeris got started, I smile and say, in a garage, with a chip no one believed in, and a boss who called it trash. Funny thing is, that same chip is still in production, still delivering diagnostics across the country, still keeping factories online. And for TechCore, it is now their most critical component, supplied exclusively by me. I never had to raise my voice, never had to scream revenge. I just did the work, quietly, consistently, until the people who underestimated me had no choice but to depend on what I built. That, to me, is the best kind of full circle.